Wait until we've admitted. Everyone admitted?
Yeah.
Okay. Hello, everyone, both here in person and online. Thank you so much for joining us on this very wet evening for our first Innovation with Impact talk, a series brought to you by the University of Bath in collaboration with the Bath Royal Literary and Scientific Institution. We're very excited to kick off this series in a fantastic week for the university, as we've just retained our strong top 10 positions in the Guardian University Guide and the Daily Mail University Guide. I'm Becky, a press officer here at the University of Bath, and I'm thrilled to introduce you to tonight's speaker, Professor Chris Pudney. His groundbreaking research has uncovered a troubling issue. Spice is endemic in our schools. I had the chance to travel around the UK with Professor Pudney, observing his research firsthand, and the findings, which you'll hear about tonight, are truly eye-opening. We'll have a Q&A session at the end of the talk. I'll start with questions from the room, and then we'll move on to those watching online, so feel free to drop your questions in the chat. This is the first of 4 talks in our series, each one delving into innovative research at the university that's making a significant impact, not just globally, but also nationally. Sorry, not just locally, but also nationally and globally. To stay updated with these fascinating talks, check out the Brilsey event page and sign up. It's free. Last month, Professor Pudney's research on spice made the headlines. His survey of schools across the UK revealed synthetic cannabinoids or spice in vapes almost everywhere he looked. As Professor Pudney pointed out over the summer, we are at that level where it is so pervasive now and the risk is so great that I'm concerned we might see a death. This groundbreaking discovery was made possible thanks to Professor Pudney's remarkable drug detection technology, which can identify spice and other drugs in minutes, a huge leap forward for police forces who previously had to wait months for expensive lab results. So without further ado, let's dive in and welcome Professor Chris Pudney.
Thanks very much, Becky, and thank you so much to everyone that came in person. I know it's a wet day and it's a bit of an ask. The reward for coming in person is that we'll test your drugs using the device. No, of course we won't really. None of you have brought drugs, but we will at the end, if you'd like to look at the technology and have a play with it, you're very, very welcome to. I'm grateful for Becky's introduction. We did do a lot of traveling in the early part of the summer, and I was very grateful for her support throughout the whole of this project. So I'm sorry to say that we're starting with, there's not a lot of fun to be had in the talk here today. We have at least 2 people on dates this evening. I see 2 groups, and good luck with that. You know, it's a dour subject. It's a very serious subject, and all to preface to say, some of the subject matter is a little upsetting. Just so that you know, I will, on a couple of occasions, reference sexual assault, and just so that you're aware that's going to happen. I want to tell you what I'm going to tell you about. We found a synthetic drug is in the vast majority of our schools, and it's a drug that you find almost exclusively used by people in prison. In prison, it's associated with nearly half of the non-natural deaths. And so you can see why it's a very serious subject. What I want to explore with you this evening is not just some of the information on the prevalence and where this is, but maybe thinking about the drivers of why it's happened and why do we only just know about it now. We will talk about, I think, what we can do about it. I hope you'll have views, and I'll give you what my view is. Really, the most value, and what I'll want to say to you, is that with anything to do with drug addiction or drug use, the only most valuable thing is education. It's not something you can pay your way out of, you know, by militarizing your police or, you know, being tough on crime. you have to educate the folk that are at risk. And that's what I want to say to you. And part of my job this evening is if I give you a good enough overview and you're educated enough that when you go out and you speak to young people or you speak to adults with work with young people, you can communicate what you've heard tonight. And that's got a good chance of feeding forward that kind of information that can decrease the harm that these drugs can do. Because we should be clear about it, it's not going away. It's going to be something that we'll have to learn to live with, like a lot of drugs. So to point out, there are a lot of names on the left. I actually feel very guilty. I haven't even put all of the names of the collaborators. There are a great many people that have worked on this project and related projects to bring them to fruition at the university. I'm incredibly grateful to our partners in prisons and police forces and schools and local councils across the country. I haven't named them all because I don't want to embarrass them, but it's an enormous, enormous effort. I can't tell you how many people are involved to deliver this kind of work, and I'm really privileged to work with really fantastic people. We're going to talk about a drug called spice, which maybe you've heard about on the news and got a little bit of an inkling about, but we should talk firstly about how we can talk about drugs and what the landscape of drug use actually looks like. I've got up here what are from the ONS statistics, a graph here that looks at the rates of drug death per year. And we can see it's going up in the UK and it's going up and up and up. England and Wales, this is up and up and up and up and up. It's very, very high. We have a very high rate of drug death. So the rate is increasing, ever increasing rates of drug death. We're somewhere close to the top of the table in Europe, certainly not at the top. Sad to say that Scotland is by far at the top of the rates of drug death in Europe, has an incredibly high rate of drug death, and there are lots of different reasons for that. But in England and Wales, we're certainly not doing well by any means. It's true in pretty much every country, your drug death is dominated by opioid deaths. So heroin is an opioid, morphine is an opioid. You will have had morphine probably if you've gone into hospital and in pain. Heroin is diamorphine. It's very, very similar to morphine. So heroin isn't something special or magical. It's very close to what we give in a hospital. I'm not trying to say anything. I've got a figure down on the bottom right here, which looks at drug harm. And this is only from 2019, so we're already way out of date. It's very hard to collect these data. And I'm not trying to say anything by having alcohol clearly being the most harmful thing, but vastly, there's no question there, but by the by, and let's talk for another day. Opioid death is still vastly the thing that we worry about. I think what this figure does for me, and it's important for this talk, is the kind of harm that drugs do are not just death. I've showed death statistics, but there's health harm that can be not death. It can be pervasive long-term health harm that drugs do, but it can also be social harm or criminality. So we don't just think about people dying as the harm that something that can do. And that's really important for a drug like spice, as we'll go on to discuss its risks. I think for me, if we looked, there's an interesting parallel. If we actually made this figure on the bottom right up to date, if we could do that, we'd see the landscape of drug use and risk and harm has actually shifted an awful lot in a very, very short space of time. And the US is a very good exemplar of this. So there's a drug called fentanyl, which is an opioid. It's used in hospitals all throughout the UK. And it is associated or causes directly nearly 100,000 deaths in America per year. It's almost the leading cause of adult death in America, which is shocking, right? Fentanyl is a synthetic drug. It's a synthetic opioid. Let's call it synthetic heroin, if you like. And it's almost completely replaced heroin in America. Heroin almost doesn't even exist in America, if you can believe that. It's all this synthetic drug, fentanyl. And that's really the story of the last 5-10 years, is synthetic drugs coming to replace traditional drugs that we know well, like maybe don't know well, like cocaine and heroin and things that you're familiar with hearing about. And so that landscape of drug use is moving just at a pace you almost can't imagine. It evolves. There are new molecules, it seems like every day, new classes of drug, it seems, all of the time. And keeping pace with what's happening in drug use and the availability is very, very difficult for that reason. So with that being said, spice is a synthetic drug. It's what's called a synthetic cannabinoid, and what you might know about it is it's sometimes called synthetic cannabis. So the reason that it's called synthetic cannabis is because it acts in some of the same ways on the body that cannabis does. Not in the same way at all, but in some of the same ways. On the bottom right, there's no science, hopefully, in the talk today, but on the bottom left, sorry, there's a molecule, and that's what spice looks like. All to say that molecule doesn't look anything like the molecules in cannabis, nothing like it whatsoever. We still do call it synthetic cannabis, and I don't really like that, but it's a useful foil for the purposes of today. So it's a synthetic drug that's been around maybe for 10-ish, probably less than 10 years now. So it was legal. It very quickly became apparent that it was very risky, and so it was made illegal in 2016. And since then, we've seen it come and entirely dominate the British prison system. It's in every prison, very, very pervasive. And as I said, it's associated with nearly half the non-natural deaths in UK prisons on the last surveying. So very common in homeless communities as well. And that was associated with a lot of deaths. And luckily, that's kind of calmed down a lot now. If we compare it to cannabis, which maybe we shouldn't, but for the purposes today, when people consume cannabis, they consume several hundred milligrams of the active ingredient. That's what they're looking for. With spice, when you consume it, you're consuming 1 or 2 milligrams. So let's call it hundreds of times more potent than cannabis. Actually very difficult to overdose on cannabis. You kind of can't consume enough of it to overdose and really give you a problem. We can talk about whether cannabis is a harmful drug, yes or no. That's not really a discussion for today. But the point is that synthetic cannabinoids, spice, is incredibly potent. And that means that it's got a very high potential to be abused and to be addictive and for you to have negative health outcomes. Okay. We find it in lots of different forms. If you think of cannabis, it's a herb-like material. If you think of, maybe don't think of heroin, but if you think of heroin, it's a powder, often a brown powder, or cocaine, you think of a white powder, maybe, you think Pablo Escobar, right? Spice and other synthetic drugs actually are found in all sorts of different kinds of forms. I put a few of them up there, and there are many more besides. And so the modality of use can be very, very broad indeed. It's not, again, your classic, when you think of cocaine, you imagine somebody snorting cocaine, or if it's heroin, you imagine someone injecting heroin. These synthetic drugs are actually used in a range of different ways, and that can make them even more harmful because how you use a drug contributes very significantly to the kind of risk that you've got. I think what makes synthetic drugs so difficult is that they change all the time. So spice is actually a family of now I think nearly 300 different molecules. And I've got my molecule on the bottom left there, and I've just colored bits of it. And those are the bits that you can change. And you can just change those bits willy-nilly in a lab without any great drama by just chucking a bit more of A in or a bit more of B in to make a different molecule. And that allows you to get around legislation relatively easily, because if a drug is prescribed, well, I just make you a different drug. Kind of looks the same, it's going to do something, there you go. And you can change this so quickly because it's made in a proper, well-kitted out professional lab. And we'll talk a little more about that in a minute. So detecting these drugs becomes almost impossible, right? Because it changes all the time. Heroin looks the same all the time. Heroin doesn't change. Cocaine doesn't change. Spice changes, every year we have 5, 6 new molecules that we have to contend with, sometimes more. So identifying it, testing for it, and tracking it are very, very difficult indeed. I'm always tensioned with what I want to say. I don't want to bias anything, but it's maybe not a surprise that some of the technologies and some of the other things like sniffer dogs that we have aren't very good at detecting these drugs. I don't think for anyone in prison that will be a shocker, because prisons are awash with these drugs. I've seen some dogs be really great at detecting these drugs, and I've seen some dogs be really, really terrible. And there you go. And that's, again, so drug dealers, one of the real benefits of synthetic drugs. They can get them in very easily. this is quite a difficult slide for me because I'm again tensioned by wanting everyone to have a nice time and have an enjoyable evening, but it's a very unenjoyable subject matter and it's very difficult to talk about sometimes. I find it challenging to talk about because you always want to speak respectfully about people who use drugs. Stigmatizing people who use drugs has no value, doesn't stop them using drugs. Shouting at people using drugs, it doesn't do anything, it makes the problem worse. And so we don't want to stigmatize people. And I've put an image up there which is quite stigmatizing of homeless people who've used spice. I put it up there with a great deal of thought, only to remind you of some of the media reporting that you would have seen, to flash back in your minds what you think you know about spice and its harmfulness. We work a lot on trying to understand spice and its risk in different communities, and we did quite a bit of research speaking with people who use spice, particularly people in prison and people who are homeless. And I wanted to just pick out 3 quotes from 3 important factors of spice, and I'll read them briefly. I've sanitized this as much as I possibly can. These are the least upsetting quotes I could possibly find in our archive of quotes, and that should maybe tell you something. So on using spice, it's a bad drug. It's the worst one out there. Out of all the drugs I've done, I would say spice is the worst one. This is someone that's a homeless polydrug user that does use other drugs, very, very common indeed. Overdose being relatively common. It's made me go over about 3 times. When people say go over, they mean they've collapsed, and often meaning that their heart stopped. And they say, I've died. That's what people say. My heart stopped, I've died. My heart stopped, I've gone blue. I've literally died in my husband's arms. I can't cope dying like that. The truth is that people's bodies can only take so much, and they come to a point where they have cardiac arrest and they can't be resuscitated, and then they die. It's incredibly sad. On the withdrawal, heroin was bad, but spice is something else. You know, I think everything we hear is it's worse than heroin. Heroin's a leading cause of death, drug death. And so this is what we talk about when we talk about harm. While spice is not going to be on anyone's top 10 list of drug death, the harm that it does to people in terms of the addiction and the withdrawal and drawing people into lifestyle choices that they don't really want to make is incredibly high. When you're in that kind of withdrawal, you will do things against your morals to stop being in that kind of withdrawal anymore. And again, I calibrated what I've said very carefully here, but I think it's important because we are talking about the risk and the non-health risks here. There's a guy that, you know, that was surveyed, and he living in London, and he's saying, well, why do you choose to use spice? You know, you hate it, you don't like it. And he said, well, every evening a group of guys come along and they sexually assault me, and so I smoke spice because what spice does, it makes you feel dissociated, like it's not in your body. So he goes out of his body, he wakes up in the morning and he gets on with his day. And for a lot of folk, that'll be the reason that they use spice. In prison in America, used to call it bird killer. Your bird is your time, so it gets rid of your time in prison. You know, I've had the privilege to go into quite a few prisons and see them, and I find them, you know, Becky will know, I find them incredibly terrifying places to be. It's incredibly scary, a prison. And folk just want the time to disappear, and they'll do anything. If you're in a cell with 2 guys and you're locked in there 23 hours a day, which in very many of our prisons they are, we can all know what's gone on today. Lots of guys have been released, the prison system's overcrowded. You'll just do anything to make the time pass. You'll do anything to feel something. And when we surveyed people in prisons, I'll put the link up, they really said that it's being locked in my cell 23 hours a day is one of my big drivers for wanting to just use any drug, and spice is pervasive and cheap, and it gives me that effect of just time passing. And of course, being homeless is incredibly difficult. You know, it's a very, very tough place to be. And you can imagine why people would just want the days to disappear, or very difficult things that are happening to them to disappear. So whilst spice isn't really a drug that causes a lot of, not so much anymore, a lot of death, though it does cause some death, its social harm is very, very high. It's got a very high risk of being used against the person in a way they don't want. So in prison, for example, we'll see how much it costs, but people get addicted, and so they'll do anything to have it, and so they'll build up a debt within prison they can't possibly repay. And so they'll be asked to do things against their morals to repay that debt. and that can be including engaging in unwanted sexual activity, but also committing other criminality, both in prison and when they're outside of prison. And so it really is a gateway into very much more harmful things to the person and society more generally. You know, I certainly know of an example in the homeless community where it was used as a weapon. So you would give someone, you know, some spice to smoke and it would just make them collapse and you just rob them and take all their stuff. So those kind of risks for me is where spice lies, because it does that thing of making you just not be in your own body, and then you're not in control anymore. People can do things to you you don't want them to do, put you in compromising positions, and potentially blackmail you. And that's why I think it's a risky drug. Yes, of course, there's a risk of death also. So where does it come from? Why do we have so much of it? It's just straightforward, just comes from China. It's made in well-kitted out laboratories in China. And they are able to make vast quantities of it. It's synthetic organic chemistry. It's very straightforward to make these molecules. It doesn't take a lot of effort. You can make it with what you've got laying around. If you run out of some precursor, you can use a different precursor. So it's very adaptable. It's a good question of, well, why don't we just stop people doing that then? Why are they doing that? The truth is that it's not a big problem in China. It employs a lot of folk in the region, and they don't view it as their problem. So this is a quote actually from a BBC article from a person, a middleman, essentially drawing from labs in China and selling it over here, and said, yeah, we buy from 10 different labs. We have a large selection. I've got a professional shipping agent who packages the goods. So they have a very high delivery success rate to the UK. If you put this stuff in a big package, there is no way to detect the spice in there. We do not have anything that's going to be able to do that. And so it's going to get through. And so we can maybe see why this drug is so pervasive, because you can make it easily, you can ship it very easily, and no one's going to be able to detect it. We've also seen people making it in the UK. So you can also, if you don't want to buy the actual drugs, you can buy a kit where you can get the legal precursors coming in, and you get a description of what to buy off eBay for all the chemicals you need, and it's instructions on how to make the drugs. And this image in the middle there shows again, from a news media outlet, shows an image of somebody making it in their garage. We actually see that increasingly commonly in prisons, this kind of homemade stuff coming in. It varies in purity from what we've seen, 85% to 15%. So there you go. The stuff you get from China is almost always completely pure. However, there we are. There is another modality, and it kind of depends how you want it. You can just buy it on the surface web right now. I was tensioned again. Do I want to show a website where you can buy these drugs? I have done it because you can just search for buy cannabis vape, and it's one of the top hits that you'll get from Google. It's not an unindexed site. It's not on the dark web. It's on the clear web, and there you go. You can see that it's claiming this notion that it's synthetic cannabis, right? It's a kind of medical supplement. And cannabis in our society now has certainly amongst teenagers also, a view as being quite safe, which it kind of is. Not really a big deal, you know, a part of life course of trying it. And even CBD, which is one of the constituent components of cannabis, is legal. You know, you can buy it everywhere: CBD oil, CBD shampoo, CBD everything, right? And the reason you can buy it everything is because it doesn't do anything. THC, the other molecule in cannabis, is the real psychoactive component, which is illegal. But because we're able to buy CBD, it's confusing. And so when you market something as a kind of a cannabis, here they're marketing it basically as a medicinal product. They're marketing themselves as a legal dispensary. And obviously it's not. You might not be able to see it, but actually even on the side, they're showing you different kinds of spice that you can buy as a powder. You can also buy it as a vape liquid from the shop. You can buy other drugs from the shop. They'll ask you to pay in cryptocurrency. If you don't know what cryptocurrency is, there's a link to a YouTube channel on how to fill up a cryptocurrency wallet, and you can pay them, and you won't be able to trace it. And they'll just ship it to you in an unmarked package, and nobody will ever know. If you've got a big problem, you can ring them. There's a phone number on the top there. I believe they've got a repeat customer rewards program. They have on established review websites, they have reviews from people that have used their service. This is one website. There's 100 others that you can find trivially searching for this. So old-fashioned Googling things, isn't it? Using the internet. My daughter turns 13 next month, and she has a phone, and I said, well, you can have TikTok at 13. That's when they allow them on the platform. I said, well, let's have a discussion and a dialogue with you about that. If that's for you or not for you, I'm happy to do that. And of course, we talk about drugs at home all the time. It's kind of really boring at home. She finds it very boring. And I said, oh, you know, you'll be able to buy drugs then on TikTok, won't you? Hilarious. She's like, oh no, if you want to buy drugs, you buy them on Telegram. So Telegram is another messaging app, a bit like WhatsApp. My 12-year-old daughter knows where to buy drugs. She doesn't need to go on a website. She just goes on Telegram and she can have the drugs delivered to her house. You don't need to find a scary drug dealer in the dark in a bad part of town anymore. You just have the drugs that you want delivered to you. And that's really what synthetic drugs have done. They are so potent, you buy tiny, tiny amounts, and we're not very good at detecting them. And there's a lot of them, so they're really, really cheap. So that's what life is like. And I know that doesn't sound very good, but that's important because you now might start to understand why a synthetic drug is found in nearly all of our schools. Don't buy drugs off Telegram or the internet. What does it look like? I showed a few images of it. I think what's really fascinating about spice is how people use it, and what it looks like depends on the place where you find it. We are going to talk about schools now. I know it's been a bit of a wait. In prisons, it's soaked onto sheets of paper, and then it's inserted into the prison issue vape pen, and it's smoked. And I'll show you how that's done in just a second. In homeless communities, they almost still always smoke it, sprayed onto a herb-like material. It was sold as synthetic cannabis, remember, and that's still pervasive in homeless communities. They will expect it. It's literally a tea leaf or a mushroom leaf, and you get a big bottle of spice that you've dissolved up, and you have a big tray, and you spray it all over that, and then you package it up, and that's your spice. A lot of what causes overdoses is because if you've sprayed it really hard in this corner and you've given that to someone, then you've got a locally very high concentration of a massive overdose. We'll talk about schools ad nauseum, but in schools, you find it in vape liquid. And vaping is really common in schools. I guess what I want to say here with this slide is that it's a complex drug to track, because the mode of use changes depending on who's using it. But look at the three things I've got on the same slide. Look at the three places you find spice in society. You find it in prison, you find it in homeless populations where people are often polydrug users, and you find it in secondary schools, and you find it in most secondary schools. Okay. We will talk schools. I think the context of use and where we see it is really important for us to understand the risk, however. And this is the closest. Prisons are really the place where we understand spice use and its risk, because it's the only place people use it en masse. So everything we know about spice really comes from adult male users in prisons. In prison, you'll soak it onto sheets of paper, or it will come in soaked into clothing, in garments, and you'll extract it from the garment and soak it back onto paper. Pair of socks I heard about today when I was at a prison today. That's nothing, it's brought in by staff corruption, brought in by guards, brought in a book where all the pieces of paper are soaked in it, brought in by relatives. People will go out, soak their clothes in spice in the community, get arrested so they can be put in prison to put the spice in prison. I can talk all night about this. Suffice to say, there's enormous amounts of this material, and it's incredibly, incredibly cheap. And what people will do is actually rip open the prison issue vape pen and insert a small piece of this paper, a few pounds worth of this paper into the vape pen, and they'll put it on the coil of vape pen, and they'll combust it and then smoke it in that way. So it's a little like truly smoking it. What's interesting here is that they will use maybe 1 milligram or 2 at a time. There's about 1 milligram per square centimeter of spice on these bits of paper, and people generally use a few square centimeters. So generally at a go, they're smoking a couple of milligrams. When we surveyed all the spice in the schools, the spice is about 1 milligram per milliliter, 1.5 milligrams per milliliter, and people usually consume about 2 milliliters. So kids in schools are consuming about the same amount as people are consuming in prison. And in prison, half of the non-natural deaths associated with spice use. So you can see why it's really worrying in terms of health harm. So let's talk about schools. You kind of know the story now. And I'm just going to flesh the story out for you. And I want to get to the bit where we talk about what we can do. What motivated us to do this? Well, I think we were working in prisons a lot. And I'll hold it up there, the camera can see it. This device is actually a device that we have in quite a few prisons for detecting spice on paper. So you'll take a sheet of paper and you'll pass it across your sheet of paper. There we go. There's a bright ultraviolet light you might be able to see coming out there, and you'll pass it across your sheet of paper and it will go red if there's spice present, or clothing, or anything you might be able to soak spice on. So it's really designed for the prisons to use. They call it a spice wand, I'm told, in prison. It doesn't have a name. If you come up with a better name, then please do tell me. We started to see, I guess we started to track this around autumn of last year, where we were looking at media reports of children collapsing in schools, notionally potentially to do with THC or spice use in vapes. And the map on the left shows media reports across 1 year of children collapsing in schools, potentially to do with spice in vapes. And we just started to track it. And it got to the point, I think, around February, where there was a news media report every few weeks on this, and it just got ridiculous. Children don't collapse in schools. It's just not a thing. It's just not a thing that happens. But it seemed to be pervasively happening across the entire country. You started to get reports of children ending up in intensive care, being put in induced comas, and even having cardiac arrests. Around this time last year, we'd sort of had an inkling something was going on. We just wondered if we could make this thing detect spice in vape pens. And that's a bit of a problem, right? Because vape pens are sealed. I don't know if anyone vapes here, but they're sealed units. What can I do? I can't see through a sealed unit. And so we made something that could extract a small amount of material from a vape pen and then test the vapor for any drugs. Works exactly the same way as this. It's just a bit bigger because it smokes a vape for me, and then a big filtration unit cleans up the air. And you're welcome to come up the front and have a little look at this. We can turn it on, have a little go with it. So we had a tool where we could detect spice in vapes, and we just thought we'd go for it. So I think it was probably around March that we started to approach police forces where we knew they'd had issues. And I think it was April where our first police force had said, yeah, absolutely, why don't you come and test? And that first school we tested in, they'd never had an overdose. They'd never had anyone sent away in an ambulance, let's put it that way. They thought they might have some THC because they'd had some kids being sick on themselves in assembly. But there you go. So we went to this school with the police while they were throwing up a knife arch actually on that day. And we thought, well, we'll test the vapes with a police officer sitting next to us. And 25% of all the vapes we tested had spice in. And it was quite a sobering day because we thought we might find the odd school had it, or we might thought we'd find the odd vape in a school had it, but a quarter of all of them did. And it was pretty tough for everyone in the room because we didn't really know what it meant or what to say. And I hope we did the best we could to support that school with the best information we could. And that school's really fantastic, actually. We then said, well, okay, to this force, everyone was really shocked and the police were really shocked. Let's say that, the police were really shocked. Police all over the country have an inkling about this, but didn't have evidence. They said, well, look, why don't we draw from all the schools in that region? You'll come and sit in the police station and we'll just go through everything. And we did that. And the number was really high. It was like 12 or 13% on that day. And they said, well, okay, what would be really helpful is you bring them back to our labs. Okay, let's do a proper job on this. This is, as good as it can be, but it's not a big machine in a lab that costs £1 million. Let's really go for it. And so they very kindly brought a whole region's worth of vapes to our labs, sacks and sacks of them. And we just beaver way through all of them. Yeah, same number. So, 14, 15% of everything that we tested from all schools was spice. And so then we went to a different region entirely and got the same result. And then we went to a different region and we got the same result, and a different region and we got the same result. And almost all of the schools that we tested had spice in, almost all. So let's look at those data. We can see spice. This is actually from one of those days where we tested. And I think it's a good story of that technology being really enabling. I'm just going to share the results of what we did with you. We did, I think in the end, nearly 40 schools, 38, 40 schools. We've done quite a few more since then, but there we go. 75% of all of those, we found spice in them. I'd say it's in every school, really. It's just sampling error. If you just sample deep enough, I'm sure we'd find it in every school, is the honest truth. In the end, something like 17.5% of all of the about 600 vapes we had spice in them. And on this figure, NDD, no drug detected. So the remainder, we didn't find any drugs. Remarkably little THC. You can see here, remarkably little. THC is kind of like cannabis, right? Are you surprised that there's almost no cannabis in these schools? I thought we find cannabis everywhere. Teenagers don't mind trying cannabis. They see it as a rite of passage. They don't view it as risky. And there's a very high prevalence or rate of use of teenagers of cannabis. It's really common to try it. But there's way more spice than there is cannabis. And what we think is happening, you can look back at the website I showed you earlier, and you know what's happening, don't you? They're being sold a cannabis vape, but spice is much cheaper than cannabis. If you buy a THC vape, it's something like 15, 30, even 60 pounds. A spice vape might be a few pounds. And so you're just being sold the cheapest possible thing going. What was important for us, and I think from a policy point of view, you almost never find spice vapes in disposable single-use vapes. I know the government's going to ban single-use vapes, or maybe they do if they reintroduce the bill. That will not stop this problem. It will do nothing for this problem because the vast majority are found in refillable vapes, in vape liquid bottles. We'll look at some of them just now. So if anyone tells you that banning single-use vapes will affect drug use, it won't. All of the drug use is in the refillable vapes. Here's a good smattering of what we found, a really good range. And on the left-hand side, I've got all of these unlabeled bottles of liquid. That's how they come. If you care to go on TikTok after this or on the internet for any few moments, you'll see that's what people are selling are clear bottles of spice liquid. They don't have labels on them. We found a few with a few fake labels, but we only found 3 with fake labels on them. And on the right are all of the refillable vapes that people are filling up using the liquid with their refillable vapes. And there's a brand that's really common, but actually it varies depending on what region you're in. Some regions really like one brand, other regions actually don't care, and it's a real mishmash. Some brands are even famous in a region amongst kids for them being used for drug use. They're all characterized really by the cap being easily removed. You can throw the cap in the bin and you just buy packs of the caps that are empty, you fill them up with liquid, they magnetically snap on to a USB rechargeable base. Or you can, if you want, just keep the same cap and fill it up again. It's just got a little port on the side. It's remarkably easy. It's not difficult at all. I guess the good news here is that you can identify the vapes that you worry about very easily. It's not hard to detect or by visually triage what you've got and whether you worry about it. I think in the end, something like half of all the bottles of liquids and refillables that we had spice in. So you can know. And if you've got a disposable vape, you just don't really need to worry, for the reason that when you buy it online, you buy it as a liquid to fill up a vape. Why is it risky? You maybe know. We gave up knowledge. There is a health harm here, but no child has ever died. Children have had cardiac arrests. They've had effective CPR at the moment, and they've been taken to hospital. I think our worry over the summer was that somebody would use it alone in their bedroom, have a cardiac arrest, and they would be dead. And thankfully, that hasn't happened. For me, I think probably the big harm is what happens when a child becomes addicted. So we know that children have become addicted to using spice. You'll remember the quotes that I spoke about earlier about how incredibly addictive spice is from people that have used it. For me, the real risk is it's a gateway into criminality and abuse. If you smoke spice and you collapse, or you kind of aren't in your body anymore, you don't know what's going on, someone can put you in a compromising position, take a photo of you, blackmail you. If you're addicted, you will do almost anything to deal with the withdrawal symptoms. So if someone says, I'll give this to you if you do X, if you do Y, if you take this parcel of drugs over here for me, if you perform this sexual favor for me, it puts people in the pocket of organized crime and at a very, very high risk of abuse. The youngest person that I know confirmed child that smokes spice is 13, and I'm positive it'll be younger. So there we go. I put quite an evocative image in the bottom right there. It's not my image, it's from Essex Police, and it's all about understanding organised crime and county lines and how vulnerable children can be. And a drug like spice makes children incredibly vulnerable. And I think that's the harm that we're really talking about with spice. We actually don't know in terms of health consequence what happens long term if a child's addicted to spice. I couldn't tell you. We don't know. We don't even understand the pharmacology of spice use in adults. So we have very little knowledge about children. So what can we do? It's famously been said that the war on drugs has been lost and no one won. I said at the start, didn't I, that America has almost its leading cause of adult death is drug overdose. And that is one of the most militarized police forces, one of the most well-funded police forces on the face of the planet. Doing that, having zero tolerance on drugs, it really didn't work. It's the opposite of worked. They've got the worst drug problem on the face of the planet. Our drug problem in England and Wales is just going up and up and up. So whatever we're doing isn't really any good. And the general view now is that what's called harm reduction, trying to decrease the harm that drugs do rather than telling people just say no, which has never worked, is the way to decrease the harm. Acknowledging that harm isn't just death. Harm is trying to decrease criminality and abuse. There's a couple of really good examples here. So we worked with a force, the first force that we ever worked with, actually, and I think it's fair I can probably just say it was the Met. It was in Greenwich, which actually where I'm from originally. And they were the most wonderful group of people to work with, just completely dedicated to their kids in the schools. And the work that we did with them, looking at their material, they were able, as part of their Project ADDA, their drug harm prevention project, to actually get a load of kids from schools together. This is actually Charlton Athletics training grounds near where I grew up. Things had a lick of paint since then. And they were able to show them, this is what to look for. If you think someone's selling you cannabis vapes, it's not cannabis, it's spice. And this is what spice looks like. So they were able to educate those kids. Now, all of those kids know that if someone offers you a cannabis vape, it's actually a prison drug. And they've got a shot at saying no, or they can know that it's risky, and so they might not use it on their own. So they've got a lower risk of a bad health outcome. I think that is perfect. That's exactly what you need to do. If you could communicate to every child, it's why we pushed all the media-y stuff right over the summer. If you can let every child know that if someone offers you a THC or a cannabis vape, or offers you a vape and said, here, you'll like this, it's vastly likely to be a prison drug, which is incredibly risky. My bet is the vast majority of those kids will say no. They might be up for trying cannabis, but they're definitely not up for trying a prison drug. Another example is on the right. It's actually a colleague of mine works on it in Manchester. They've got a really developed drug early warning system in Manchester, and this is a 2A4 that they sent out to schools and to the regions so that people could really understand their kind of risk. I think this is great. Not only does it show people what to look for, it also says harm reduction advice if there's a bad health outcome. And again, that's really ideal. That's really best in class of what we can hope to do. I hope it's a positive message. I think we know about it now, right? And so now we can communicate to the people that we know that we think might be at risk, or alert people that we might be at risk, what their risk is like, have open, honest conversations. Remember that are non-stigmatizing, and that respect that actually just a bit of education, a bit of care and a bit of love is the thing that will make the most difference here. So with that, I'll say thank you so much for your time, and I'll be very pleased to take any questions. Thank you. Thank you.
that on. You got any questions in the room? Yep.
Cool. Thank you very much for the talk. Really quite scary.
Yep.
You said you had like a near teenage daughters. I've got a couple of teenage daughters myself.
Yep.
Having done this research and seeing what works and what doesn't work, how would you approach kind of talking to teenagers?
Yep. I think you just, it's such a great question. It's the only most important question. Open and honest. This is what you're going to encounter. Someone will definitely offer you this, 100% guaranteed. And if someone offers you a vape and says, try this, you'll like it, you need to be aware of your risk. The truth is, if you smoke spice, you probably will like it. That's why people smoke drugs, strong drugs, because they like them. Okay, but it carries with it a really high risk of harm. Why are they offering it to you? What's going to happen to me? So I think you need to be really aware of your risk. And if you can tell them, look, there is a risk, very high chance it's going to be this kind of drug, and that can put you in a very compromising position, my bet is that they'll say no, of their own volition, rather than being shouted at and told to just say no. So you give them all the information in a non-judgmental way, and that's got the best risk of decreasing their harm, because they will encounter this stuff, but they absolutely will, and they'll be pressured into using it. So the more you can give them that kind of honest information and your support to say, if it happens, just let me know, then we can talk about it. Yep.
Cheers, thank you.
I think maybe what I should have said is when we talk about addiction, how do we spot the signs of addiction? That can be really complex because we don't know what addiction to spice looks like in a child, really. I think it's those things are like changes in behavior, being erratic, having a really new, different social group that, you know, is risky, hiding things from you. Unfortunately, things that teenagers do already. And I think if you do sense that they're addicted to something, you are going to want to seek medical support with that, because again, we have no knowledge of what that looks like with withdrawal as well.
Hi, I really enjoyed your talk. How does the machine that you've made for testing vape pens actually work, particularly if all the molecules can change so much with the different components?
We use magic. So that's how you do it. Dark magic. No, it generically detects. So the spice molecules have a really similar kind of core to them that you can't really change or they stop being spice. But much like the fluorescent lights you have in rooms, if we give some energy to those molecules, they'll give us back a particular kind of light, and that's the kind of light that we detect. But we just detect it generically as the light that spice gives off, kind of fluorescence. Yeah.
Got any other questions?
I wasn't aware of any of this, but then I'm quite old. So, you know, and it seems that it's something that's evolved very, very quickly. The situations evolve very quickly. How aware are schools of the problems this is presenting to them?
Not, I would say, in my experience. I think some schools are really alive to it. I think the schools have had children collapse and then it analytically confirms they've got a sense. I think the scale of it, no one was prepared for, because if you only know about it when there's a severe health outcome, then there you go. I remember the first school we did, they had no sense at all, and everyone was incredibly shocked. I think everyone's always been shocked, every school we've gone into. And I think it's worth saying, it really is every kind of school. So Becky and I we were doing a media piece, and the story was we would go up to a school and we bring the things and they put a load of vapes out and we would test them, and oh, you know, there we go. And we drove up to the front of the school, and it's the nicest school I've ever seen. They are fine. There's no funding deficit there. They're okay. Kids well behaved, well turned out, looked like a model school to my eye. And I said to the headmaster, you know, it's not going to make good TV, right? You're not going to have anything in here whatsoever. And he said to me, do you know what? The reality is schools draw from really broad catchments of human beings and areas. And let's just see. Yeah, we found spice in there. I think the reality is you'll find it. It's not about whether it's a good school or a bad school. It's about being mindful of the risky positions that children can be put in.
So it sounds like something that needs to be addressed quite quickly,
Yeah.
because obviously the problem is evolving very, very quickly.
Exactly right. Yeah. And how do we do that is the question. So what I will hope and what I've asked for is that the relevant government entity provides some advice and support to schools. Had that call a week ago, and hope they'll choose to do that. And if they don't choose to do that, then we've been speaking with the team here. We'll seek to do that ourselves, to put something out to schools and some supportive material, so that they can be more aware and have some supportive material. I think it's part of doing events like this. It's part of doing media. Is to raise that kind of awareness. Yeah.
Oh, okay. One more question in the room, and then I will move on to the questions online. Thank you for those coming in.
Thank you. Will you continue the research? Is it going to be an ongoing research to get more data?
Yeah, I think so. We were just talking about this. How much do you keep doing? So there's certainly, I mean, what's really great that's come out of this is to the point, your point at the front here is, I think schools are opening up to the problem now and admitting they've got a problem now. No school wants to admit they've got drugs in it, but every school has drugs in them. And so now schools being a bit more open is great. So particularly councils now are a bit more willing to want to talk about this. And we've had lots of councils contact to say, well, look, can we do the same thing and just dip sample our schools? And we're happy to do that. So I think it's something that we'll keep chipping away at, I guess, to keep kind of an eye temporarily on what the problem looks like. And as you say, if it evolves over time. Yeah, and these kind of technologies are a part of that, because they're basically instant. Whereas, running the £1 million machine, like, it takes a good old long while. So we hope things like that can be supportive. And actually, we're giving those away to police forces around the country. We hope we've got about to have the third one going out soon. We should have another 3 out as well. And the idea is those forces then can do that kind of sampling of their own volition whenever they want to do it. I know Devon and Cornwall have got a really developed program of what they're going to do actually over the academic year. And we hope other police forces, when they get their device, are going to do the same thing.
How much do the devices cost?
Well, we don't sell them. We just try and give them away, really. So there's something like, 1,500 quid, £2,000 in parts for us to make. And, we just, with what we can, we just try and get as many out of the door as we can. So, I think we've got 10 or 11 out in prisons, and we hope to have 6 of those out with different police forces to support schools. And we'll always seek to try and do more. Of course, there comes a limit, but we're pushing hard as we can against that limit.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to head to the online questions, and I'll come back to the room in case there are any more at the end. Question from Emma. Thank you for the enlightening talk. I work in a secondary school, and I think you're totally right about talking to young people in a non-judgmental and caring way. I think one of the biggest factors preventing adults talking to students about things like spice and the dangers of spice is a lack of knowledge themselves. Do you think more needs to be done to educate professionals working with teenagers on trendy drugs in order to better understand the landscape they are navigating?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, when we talk to folk, so, we spent a bunch of time talking to a charity that works with young people in schools across a bunch of different schools around Cleveland and Redcar, which have had a very bad problem of spice in their secondary schools. And that charity is very alive to the problem. They talk very coherently to their students about that problem. But that's because they've known about it for a long time. I think now we need to devolve that best practice to other groups that speak with young people in schools. But to that point, it's such a fast evolving landscape. It's really hard to keep up with the trends and what's happening. But I completely agree, that kind of education, yes, to our children, but also to the service professional is really, really important. Yeah.
Okay. My question is, this is from Erica. Thank you, Erica. My question is about penitentiary education. In England, penitentiary education is provided by Prison Education Trust. Is there other ways to promote a healthy lifestyle in prison and prevent sociopathological phenomena in prisons?
I think if you didn't lock people up 23 hours a day, you'd have a much better shot at educating people. We're not even at the point of doing clever things, educating people in prison because they're in their cells all the time. I think the problems in the prison system are incredibly challenging to solve. Yeah.
Thank you, Erica. This is one from Jean, and this has been a very popular question. Are you looking to come into schools to test, and can we contact you if this is needed?
So yeah, you can imagine we get it quite a lot. I think do contact, and what we'll seek to do is I would rather do a whole big school area rather than one school at a time, but absolutely to contact, and that contact means we'll probably contact your local council and we'll say, do you have an appetite to do it? And if they've got an appetite to do it, then we'll just try and do a whole big region. So do contact, that's fine.
Yeah, it's the local councils, the police forces
Yeah.
that they
We
can
have to
get on
ask the
board.
permission to the force, we have to ask the permission from the council, but I'd like to think they would say yes.
And again, yeah, the question of it, how can we get this information for general use? Brilliant talk tonight, but how can we get this out there for everyone? And I guess that goes down to the government and what
So
what's been the
I think it's
help there?
okay to say, I have asked them, did get on a call with a few different departments there, and I asked them to do something about this, and there you go. I take the view that if they don't do anything to message schools with supportive information, then we'll seek to provide that supportive information to schools ourselves. And we're talking with, a bunch of the guys in the professional services at Bath about how we might go about doing that.
And Andrew, this lecture hopefully will be available on YouTube in due course. So yeah, that will be publicly available. John asks, why are prisons issuing vapes? I think he thinks that the prison guard, they're issuing vapes, but that's not what's happening.
No,
is it?
so smoking was banned in prisons a while ago, but vaping is allowed, and there's a particular kind of prison issued vape pen that you can have hold of. Yeah, so yeah.
Okay, and Suzanne, thank you for your suggestion. She's suggesting sending information to teacher trade unions who could then distribute for you. Okay, thank you very much for that suggestion, Suzanne. I think I had a question for you, Chris, which was you decided to release this research to the media and it had a tremendous result, but that was actually before peer review research and even before preprint. The preprint is now out, and there are maybe some in the Vanguard who might say, oh, that's not how we do things around here. So why did you decide to take that approach?
I think we had so what would normally happen when you work at university, you have research and you publish it and you put it out, and then we can talk about it. And when you publish something, you send it to a journal and it takes a few months in review, and then maybe it gets published after another few more months, and who knows, right? We pushed ourselves really hard to complete this research before the start of the summer, because my worry was that we needed to get the information out to young people as the summer started. Just because that's how it's always been done doesn't mean that's the way it has to be done. I think if you've got a moral and ethical duty to do something, you should do it. And I don't really care what other academics think. So there we go. Well, it's available. You can see it's online. It's a preprint. Anyone on earth can comment on it and vent their spleen at me. They're welcome to.
And it is a fantastic preprint, and I think it's fantastic research that you've done, Chris. So thank you for giving us this talk this evening and sharing your research. It's been a really fantastic discussion. Have we got any more questions? We do. Thank you. If you've got any more online questions, please post them now. We're coming to our last ones in the room.
Chris, obviously I enjoyed your talk very much, but I've been following it along. The teaching unions often have annual conferences. There are headmasters' conferences, the ordinary. Can you book a slot in these sorts of conferences, just a 10-minute, quarter of an hour talk, which would get the message out to so many schools all in one go?
That's a fantastic suggestion. I hadn't thought that. We'll absolutely look to that. Yeah, absolutely right. Yeah. And in fact, and just to say, I think that was probably Mike's wife's suggestion. There we go. So he's taking credit there. But
I've got grandchildren who are teenagers. Yeah.
Mm.
You won't be able to answer it quickly, but you said that that it comes from China.
Yeah.
And it's not seen as a particular problem there. Now, is that because they don't use it, or because, and if so, why do we use it over here and not over there?
It's a great question. I wouldn't want to pretend to have the correct answer, only supposition that we're aware of. There isn't much use of it in China, though there may be that we're just not aware of. I think the view is that it's a problem for over here and not a problem there. But I know there have been lots of discussions around intergovernmental cooperation on trying to stamp out stuff like this. I'm sure it's going on. I think there's some really probably very interesting politics going on around it. Yeah. I think if I can, maybe even to expand a little on that, we'll certainly see other synthetic drugs coming from China, but now also increasingly from India as well. Yeah.
Do we have any more questions online? No, that's it. Oh.
Thank you. Did you see or consider edibles? Is that something that you've seen a lot of?
Yeah, I got a safe full of edibles that need testing at the moment. So my gut tells me that they won't be spice. My gut tells me they really will be THC. But we'll let you know. We've been it's been the privilege of my career to work with different police forces, and we've had a few forces bring edibles for us to test through. We'll have to complete that work and have a little look. I hope there isn't spice in it, but we'll see.
Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Professor Pudney, for your time this evening. Let's give him a big round of applause.
Thank you everyone for coming. I'm very grateful. And we'll come down the front and test our drugs now. No, thank you.
Turn this off. So yeah, thank you for attending and for all your thoughtful questions, for everyone online for attending. Thank you to Brilsey, of course, for hosting us tonight. Our next talk in this series will be on October the 8th. Head to Brilsey, sign up, get your tickets. It will be about student startups, including augmented reality video gaming app. Wow, transforming physical education in schools, and a business using advanced AI to collect elite level rugby data instantly. So we hope to see you then. Thank you.